Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the annals of time, exploring the complexities and nuances of human history. Today, we find ourselves in the midst of a tumultuous period as we delve into the intricacies of the Spanish Civil War, a conflict that would leave an indelible mark on the nation and the world at large. This pivotal event, spanning from 1936 to 1939, was a maelstrom of political ideologies, social upheaval, and brutal violence, drawing in nations and ideologies from across the globe. As we navigate the labyrinthine paths leading up to this cataclysmic event, we must first set our gaze upon the Spain of the early 20th century. It was a nation in turmoil, its people torn asunder by the dichotomies of tradition and modernity, of monarchy and republicanism, of fascism and communism. The once mighty Spanish Empire, which had spanned the globe, now found itself beset on all sides by the forces of change. In 1931, the Bourbon monarch, King Alfonso XIII, abandoned his throne, marking the end of a centuries-long monarchical tradition in Spain. This led to the establishment of the Second Spanish Republic, a fledgling democracy born of the ashes of the old regime. However, this new republic was fraught with challenges, as various factions and interest groups vied for power and influence. One of the primary architects of the Second Republic was Manuel Azaña, a liberal politician who served as both prime minister and president. Azaña's vision for Spain was one of modernization and secularization, which put him at odds with the powerful Catholic Church and the landed aristocracy. His government implemented various reforms, including the establishment of a secular education system and the redistribution of land to peasant farmers. However, not all Spaniards shared Azaña's vision for the future. On the right, there existed a plethora of nationalist and fascist groups which saw the Republic as a threat to traditional Spanish values. One such group was the Spanish Confederation of Autonomous Right-Wing Groups, or CEDA, led by the enigmatic José María Gil Robles. The CEDA advocated for a return to authoritarian rule and the reinstatement of Catholic dominance in Spanish society. On the left, the landscape was equally complex, with various socialist, communist, and anarchist factions vying for influence. The Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, or PSOE, led by figures such as Indalecio Prieto and Francisco Largo Caballero, sought to implement a radical program of social and economic reform. Meanwhile, the Communist Party of Spain, backed by the Soviet Union, began to gain traction among the working class and peasantry. As these competing forces jostled for position, the Spanish military, once a bastion of monarchical loyalty, became increasingly politicized. A group of right-wing officers, led by General José Sanjurjo, attempted a coup in 1932, which ultimately failed but served as a harbinger of things to come. In the years leading up to the Civil War, Spain was plagued by escalating violence and social unrest. Strikes, protests, and assassinations became commonplace, as the various factions sought to intimidate and eliminate their opponents. The country teetered on the brink of chaos, with the Republic's institutions struggling to maintain order in the face of mounting anarchy. It was within this maelstrom that a charismatic and ambitious young general, Francisco Franco, began to make his mark. Franco, who had risen to prominence during the Rif War in Morocco, became increasingly disenchanted with the Republic's inability to quell the growing unrest. He started to secretly build alliances with other right-wing officers and nationalist groups, laying the groundwork for a future rebellion. As Franco's alliances solidified, the die was cast for a catastrophic confrontation. On July 17, 1936, a group of right-wing generals, including Franco, launched a coordinated uprising against the Republic, marking the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. The coup, known as the Alzamiento, was sparked by the assassination of Lieutenant José Castillo, a member of the fascist Falange Party, by Republican police in Madrid. This event served as a pretext for the generals to rise up, and soon military garrisons across Spain were rebelling against the government. The rebels, who would come to be known as the Nationalists, made swift gains in the first days of the war, capturing key cities such as Seville, Córdoba, and Granada. However, their advance was halted by fierce resistance from Republican forces, particularly in Madrid and Barcelona. The Republic's government, led by Prime Minister José Joral, scrambled to respond to the crisis, mobilizing loyal troops and militias to defend against the nationalist onslaught. One of the most pivotal events of the war occurred on August 19, 1936, when nationalist forces, led by General Franco, captured the strategic city of Badajoz. The fall of Badajoz was accompanied by a brutal massacre of Republican prisoners, with estimates suggesting that up to 4,000 people were killed in the aftermath of the battle. This atrocity would become a defining feature of the conflict, as both sides committed numerous atrocities and massacres throughout the war. As the Nationalists continued their push northwards, they encountered fierce resistance from anarchist and socialist militias who had formed the backbone of the Republican defense. The city of Madrid, with its heavily fortified defenses, became a key battleground, with Republican forces, led by General José Miaja, determined to hold out against the nationalist siege. The Battle of Madrid, which began in November 1936, would become one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Meanwhile, international intervention was beginning to shape the course of the conflict. In August 1936, Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, who had long been sympathetic to the nationalist cause, began to provide significant military aid to Franco's forces. The arrival of German and Italian troops, aircraft, and equipment would prove decisive in shifting the balance of power in favor of the nationalists. In response, the Soviet Union, which had initially maintained a policy of non-intervention, began to supply arms and advisors to the Republican government. The Soviet intervention, while significant, was limited by Stalin's concerns about provoking a wider conflict with Nazi Germany. Nonetheless, the arrival of Soviet tanks, aircraft, and artillery would help to bolster Republican defenses, particularly during the Battle of Madrid. As 1937 dawned, the war showed no signs of abating, with both sides dug in for a long and brutal struggle. The Nationalists continued their push northwards, capturing key cities such as Malaga and Bilbao, while the Republicans clung to their strongholds in Madrid and Barcelona. The conflict was becoming increasingly internationalized, with foreign powers playing an ever greater role in shaping its outcome. In March 1937, the Nationalist Air Force, supported by German and Italian bombers, launched a devastating bombing campaign against the town of Guernica, killing hundreds of civilians and destroying much of the town. This atrocity would become one of the most infamous events of the war, with Pablo Picasso's powerful painting, Guernica, serving as a haunting testament to the horrors inflicted upon innocent civilians. The summer of 1937 saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the war, as Republican forces launched a series of desperate counterattacks against nationalist positions. The Battle of Brunetti, fought in July 1937, was one such example, with Republican troops suffering heavy casualties in a failed attempt to relieve pressure on Madrid. As the summer of 1937 drew to a close, the Republican forces were becoming increasingly exhausted, their armies depleted by constant battles and their resources dwindling. The Nationalists, on the other hand, continued to receive significant support from Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, which allowed them to maintain a strong military presence on the battlefield. In October 1937, the Nationalists launched a major offensive against the Republican-held city of Gijón, which fell after a brutal siege. The capture of Gijón marked a significant turning point in the war, as it gave the Nationalists control over the entire northern region of Spain. The following year, 1938, saw some of the most intense fighting of the war, as Republican forces launched a series of desperate counterattacks against nationalist positions. One of the most notable battles took place in July 1938, when Republican troops crossed the Ebro River and launched a surprise attack on nationalist forces. The Battle of the Ebro was one of the bloodiest battles of the war, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite initial gains, the Republicans were ultimately forced to retreat back across the river, marking a significant defeat for their cause. As 1939 dawned, it became clear that the end of the war was in sight. The Nationalists, led by General Franco, had gained control over most of Spain, and the Republicans were becoming increasingly isolated. In January 1939, the Nationalists launched a final offensive against the Republican-held city of Barcelona, which fell on January 26. The capture of Barcelona marked the effective end of the war, as the remaining Republican forces were forced to flee or surrender. The Spanish Civil War officially came to an end on April 1, 1939, when General Franco declared victory and established a dictatorship that would last for nearly 4 decades. The war had resulted in the deaths of an estimated 500,000 people, with many more displaced or forced into exile. As the Spanish poet Antonio Machado once said, "The Spain of my youth is dead, and I do not recognize the one that has been born." The legacy of the war would be felt for generations to come, shaping the course of Spanish history and leaving a lasting impact on the country's politics, culture, and society. Today, the Spanish Civil War is remembered as a pivotal moment in modern history, a conflict that marked the beginning of the end of democracy in Europe and paved the way for the rise of fascist and nationalist movements. The war also had a profound impact on the arts, with many notable writers, artists, and intellectuals drawn into the conflict. The war's influence can be seen in the works of authors such as Ernest Hemingway, George Orwell, and Pablo Neruda, who all wrote about their experiences during the conflict. The Spanish Civil War also serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of ideology and extremism, and the devastating consequences that can result when these forces are allowed to go unchecked. The Spanish Civil War may be a distant memory, but its impact continues to be felt today, serving as a warning and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and activism in the face of adversity. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.